So, over the week of the 15th of November, I took part in the Games Job Live Fall Game Jam. The Game Jam had a theme of Leave Something Behind, and having done two 2D games in my last two Game Jams, I was looking to do a 3D game this time around. Working as a solo dev and starting a new job the same week, time was not going to be on my side. This is not a tutorial of any kind, and I don't give great in-depth detailed explanations. A lot about this project could be categorized as janky, but since this is a game jam project, that's absolutely fine. So after watching the theme reveal livestream, I started brainstorming. I eventually settled on a game we play as a train employee. You stop at stations, you pick up the passengers, and you put them in the train, and once the train leaves, any passengers left behind counts against your record. And, of course, you don't want to be left behind either. The main pillars of this game were grab and pick up passengers, drop the passengers into the carriage, different carriage classes, and you must be on the train when it leaves. Otherwise, you're left behind. After noting all these details down and scribbling a few mock-ups of how I planned for the game to look, I was ready to start production the next day. So the first thing every game needs is some player controls. So I started off with some movement and rotation using the keyboard and mouse. This was done using the rigid body component, and it was a bit jittery starting off. It makes the character look either terrified of what we're going to do to him, or filled with anger. After I got some basic movement done, I stuck some numbers on some carriages and some passengers, and then created my random class assignment script, or my ticket script. It basically just gives each passenger either a ticket or no ticket, so if they're a valid passenger or not, and if they are a valid passenger, they give them a random class, so class 1, 2, or 3. And then after getting that working, I just created a random walking script to give the passengers a bit more life to them. This script uses the Unity nav mesh agents, and they essentially just find a random spot on the nav mesh and go to it. Once they've got to it, they'll pick a new one and then go to that. Once I had the passengers essentially working, maybe not looking too good, but working, it was time to get something to spawn them in. So I made a script which spawned a random amount of valid passengers each station, so each level. The spawn point moves after every spawn to spread them out, so it moves right, left, increasing how far they go each time. I did this to spread the passengers out across the station, as opposed to having them all spawn in one massive clump. Once I had spawning the passengers down, I just needed a way for the player to be able to pick them up and put them down, which is easier said than done apparently. I thought it'd be quite easy. You just parent the passenger to the player.
Almost too easy.
Except I had problems with the passenger rotating with the player, but not moving with the player. Then I did make it move and rotate with the player, but not on top of the player. Their rotation of a grab passenger was wrong, so it made it look a bit like a beret, but I eventually got the desired effect, minus the ability to put the passenger down. That was actually much simpler. I just placed the passenger in front of the player and re-enable the nav mesh. The last thing I did on day one was add a bit of colour to the passengers, just to give a bit of contrast between the grey background, the grey player, the grey carriages, the grey void. So after an 8-hour induction for a sales job, I loaded up the project for the second day. The first thing I did on evening 2 of the game jam was to get the ability to place passengers into carriages working. This was fairly simple to get working. It was a simple on-trigger enter that was attached to the train game object that just checked for passengers being placed inside a collision box. I also managed to get a lot of stuff done with the station timers. First, I had a station timer that counts down from a set value, in this case 10 seconds. At the end of the countdown, It checks to see if the player is on the train or not. With some errors, but they disappear later. Don't worry about them. If the player is on the train, it parents the player to the train so that the camera naturally follows. After throwing together some simple timer UI, which I never end up changing, but again, you won't worry about that. I set it up so that the time gets shortened when all valid passengers are on the train, down to 5 seconds. And that's all I managed to get done on the second day, which is small compared to what I got done on day 1. Okay, so I just got back from my first day at a new job. I was tired, and as a result of that, I only got nothing done. You can trust me, it won't happen again. To make up for the lack of work on day 3, day 4 was going to be a big day, the biggest of days. But no big productive day is complete without a little bit of panic and confusion to start off with. The type of panic and confusion you get when you try to build your game for WebGL and nothing loads in but the player model. You can't move, there's no train, there's not even any floor. I didn't understand what I'd done so wrong that nothing had ended up working. Until I looked closer at the build settings and realised I hadn't added the right Unity scene, and was instead using the default sample scene, which only had the player model in it. Whoops. But after that crisis had been averted, it was on to Player Movement 2.0, now with controller support. The player could use the left analog stick to move and the right to rotate, as well as the right trigger to pick up and put down passengers. I also added a function where if the mouse is idle for a short amount of time, the player faces the direction of movement instead of the mouse. And while rotation, when the player is facing the direction of movement, is still a bit snappy, I did manage to fix the jittering on the general movement, making the actual movement buttery smooth. After the player movement had been improved, it was on to creating animations for the train arrive and depart states, as well as a screen that tells you how many passengers you left behind at each station. These animations being placeholders for when I actually get the train model done. I then created a player left behind screen that reads "You got left behind" when the player is not on the train after it leaves, and a main menu with not 1, but 2 play buttons. Does your game have 2 play buttons? Now it was time to add some more random elements to the stations. I created my station asset spawner script, which spawns a random asset at each of the specified positions. All prefabs had their own colliders and were all avoided by the nav mesh using a nav mesh obstacle. All prefabs had their own shaped colliders and were all avoided by the nav mesh using the nav mesh obstacle component. This, in theory, would allow me to make each station different from the last. But after a lot of playtesting, I was getting pretty bored of picking up passengers and putting them down safely on the ground. I wanted to throw something. I thought getting throwing passengers working with the nav mesh component may take a while, and I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to do it. So I settled for an alternative: throwable yellow cylinders, which would later become bins. Wow! This was very easy to get working, as all I had to do was check if the player was holding a throwable object instead of a passenger, and add force to the throwable object's rigid body when they were to put it down, causing it to be thrown in the direction the player was looking instead of being placed down carefully. At the end of day 4, most of the main mechanics and game loop were done. I just had to do a few more checks and ensure bins don't cause serious errors which freeze the game loop. So you know how on day 3 I got nothing done and then told you could trust me that it wouldn't happen again? Yeah, it happened again. Day 6 was my 3D modelling day. I created a train model, passenger model, and player model before updating the arrive, idle, pick up, and depart animations. While these models weren't some of my best work, they worked for the Game Jam project and the time limit. I then took a break from 3D modeling and animating to update the main menu. I turned that second play button into a quit button before modeling an electronic sign model to go in the background of the main menu. I would also use this electronic sign model in the actual game itself on stations. I then did some stuff with the UI, creating a time running out animation and making the complaints count visible on the UI. Complaints being passengers who have a valid ticket but have been placed on the wrong carriage and refuse to walk to the correct one themselves. I then updated the bin model and added some passenger variants. The last thing I did on day 6 then was just add a full screen toggle, build it to WebGL, and upload it to itch.io to see and make sure that it ran in the way I wanted it to. Day 7 was the final day of the jam, and it was also the day I realised, hey, I should probably add some audio to my project. So I got some main menu audio, button click sounds, the game music that goes hard for absolutely no reason, the pickup sounds, which is me with my mouth bringing us one step closer to answering the question, what that mouth do, the sounds of passengers being placed into carriages, and some train sounds. After much of the audio was in place, I went back to edit the UI. I changed the font to a Google font called Press Start 2P. I also include a stop number in the UI and a shift complete screen, which showed passengers served, complaints, kidnappings, and passengers left behind. At this point, I was closing in on the final hour before the jam submission deadline. So after updating the Git repository, getting a trailer made, and some screenshots, it was time to build the final version of Fast-Track Trainline. Once the final version had been built and I had verified it was working to at least decent standards, it was time to upload the final version to the itch page and submit it to the jam.
The next game is Fast-Track Trainline. Haha, indeed. Okay, let's play it. Okay, this doesn't remind me of a Game Boy anymore. Okay.
What is happening?
Okay.
Oh my!
What am I supposed to do?
You have to check the tickets, maybe.
Okay. 2, 3.
Ah, I know. You have to push them to the.
The according appropriate.
The-
So this one, this should be pushed inside 2.
inside the two.
Are you sure about that?
But
Why you don't want? Come on.
no,
No.
it's not.
Maybe I'm
It
wrong.
was a good idea, but it's not what's happening.
Okay, guys, why you don't want to know the player what he have to do?
Oh my god. You got left behind. Okay, let's try this one again.
I like it. I like it so much.
Oh,
Why you grab it?
okay, this makes so much more sense.
I really wish I made this more clear so that it didn't take about 3 minutes to actually start playing the game as it was intended to be played.
You're so rude.
How does he know? How does he know that this one needs to go there? Okay. Hey. Okay, we're gonna try another
Guys,
stage and then.
I love it. I love it.
Here, then this one here. No. Okay.
So you can kidnap people. Kidnap someone. Come on.
No. You wanna play?
No! Oh my.
The game is up on itch.io if you want to have a look at it. I don't know whether I'll end up updating it using the feedback I received during the jam. But anyway, thanks for watching this little devlog kind of thing. Hopefully you were able to understand most of what I was saying. But yeah, I hope you found it at least a little bit entertaining. And perhaps I'll see you in the next one. If there's a next one, I have no idea.